Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Humor Workshop Part 2. Today's 60-minute program is part of the Toastmasters Public Speaking webinar series. My name is Linda Williams, and I am delighted to be with you today. As many of us know, laughter is the best medicine. And while I'm not actually a doctor, I do like to hand out prescriptions for laughter whenever possible. In real life, I'm actually a training and development specialist with Toastmasters International. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're all really excited looking at the chat right now with everyone saying hello from all over the world. Quite a few folks from the United States, coast to coast. I see India, the Netherlands, Mexico, Bahrain. There are so many great places. So thanks again for being with us. Before you meet our moderator and our panelists today, I wanted to take a few minutes to set the stage for our time together. For the majority of this 1-hour workshop, we'll be watching a live discussion between members of our expert panel, who I like to call our wizards of wit and whimsy. And as you receive today's dose of laughter and learning, we expect you might have some questions along the way. Please use the Q&A panel on your screen to submit the questions. And towards the end of the workshop, we'll choose the most difficult ones to ask our panel. Not really. In all seriousness, with so many attendees, we probably won't be able to get to all of your questions, but we'll certainly do our best, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. And while you will not be able to speak aloud, we encourage you to keep using that chat feature, talk with one another throughout the workshop. If you're not familiar, from the chat drop-down box, remember to choose send to all panelists and attendees so everyone in the audience gets to hear from you. And we thank you in advance for always remembering to be polite and courteous to your fellow attendees. Also, please keep in mind that our team will be focused on answering questions that are posted in the Q&A pane, not questions posted in the chat. This workshop is being recorded, and everyone will receive an email in a few days with a link to the recording. So before I introduce our moderator, our panel has asked me to find out how often the members of our audience actually laugh. So if you'd like to, please answer the following question using the polling feature you'll see pop up on your screen in just a moment. You should be seeing it now. The question is, have you laughed today? All right, I see answers coming in. I'll give you about 5 more seconds to answer that poll if you can and if you want to. All right. Couple of answers still coming in. Not a surprise. I'm glad to hear, yes, I've laughed today. I try to laugh daily. 17 of you said, I'm not funny. Let's look at those results, shall we? So some of you have not laughed today, and it's a good reason you're here. Thank you to the 113 of you who said, yes, they've already laughed today because I am so funny. All right, let's move right along and let me introduce with great pleasure our workshop moderator, Mark Brown. Mark's originally from Kingston, Jamaica, and he immigrated to the US when he was 18. He had only $40 in his pocket and a dream for a better life. Those of you who might know Mark, in 1995, he defeated more than 20,000 contestants from 14 different countries to win the illustrious title of Toastmasters International World Champion of Public Speaking. Since that day, Mark has delivered more than 3,500 presentations on 5 different continents to more than 1.7 million people. Please welcome one of the most popular inspirational speakers in the world, the fabulous and very funny Mark Brown.
Thanks so much, Linda. I think she meant the fabulous and funny looking Mark Brown, but it's a joy to be here and I can't wait to hear from today's panelists. Our first is Stefan Dyer. He's from Costa Rica originally. He's a banker turned comedian. He's done over 400 shows in 8 countries, including Peru, Mexico, and Malaysia. Now, 4 years ago, 2017, after being one of the youngest senior managers at Scotiabank Toronto, he quit his lucrative bank job to pursue a professional career in stand up comedy. And since then, he's been on Second City, TEDx, Comedy Central, and some of the world's largest comedy festivals. He's the co-founder and co-CEO of Malpensando, an award-winning bilingual public speaking and comedy school in Toronto, Canada. It has empowered thousands of people to become funny, confident speakers. Our second expert gets to wear two hats, having been a moderator for a panel before, and she is Tammy Miller. To hear her tell it, she's in the business of changing lives. She's the president and CEO of Tammy Speaks and Tammy Miller Auctions, which afford her titles of international speaker, auctioneer, author, and speaking coach. As an international speaker, her topics include humor and healing, communication skills, motivation, leadership, and business and dining etiquette. Tammy is also, get this, a professional clown who uses the healing power of humor when visiting hospital patients. She wrote a book about her battle with breast cancer entitled The Lighter Side of Breast Cancer Recovery. Our third panelist today is Drew Tarvin, a former engineer by profession. Drew calls himself a humor engineer, in that he's teaching people every day how to get better results while having more fun. He's a corporate trainer, a comedian, and a keynote speaker based in New York. As a speaker, he's delivered more than 5,000 talks to 35,000 and more people. And his TEDx talk called The Skill of Humor has almost 9 million views. As an author, he's written 3 best-selling books, including Humor That Works, The Missing Skill for Success and Happiness at Work. So welcome, Stefan, Drew, and Tammy. We're gonna get going, and we'll start with you, Tammy. Now, you've worked as a professional clown in hospitals. Please tell us what's involved with that, what you've learned from the process, and what you've seen as a professional clown in hospitals.
It's really a very, very interesting journey, Mark, because, when you go into a hospital, first of all, they don't really want to be there for obvious reasons, right? But it's interesting because you have to really look at what is happening there, and they can't change why they're there. So when clowns go into hospitals and look at that, they look at opportunities that they can at least alleviate for that particular moment in time what they're thinking and feeling, and maybe bringing some levity and some humor and just some love into it. So in hospitals, we look at just the patient themselves one-on-one or in a group, but it is always a wonderful, loving experience for sure.
That's like such noble work to do while having fun at the same time. We're gonna drill a little deeper on that in a couple of seconds, but I want to go to Drew, the humor engineer, and most people don't put those two words together. So for those who are kind of going, explain that to us, Drew. What is a humor engineer, and how does that work with laughter?
Certainly. Well, first, quick shout out to everyone joining today and to those of you joining us from yesterday. Quick little fun game you can play if you did join us yesterday is what's changed about my background. Maybe you noticed it, maybe you didn't. Fun little thing to have. But in the meantime, to answer the question of humor engineer, if you've never heard of a humor engineer, it's because I made it up. But the reason I made it up is as a way to best explain what I do. My background is in computer science and engineering, and as a computer science engineer working at Procter & Gamble, I would solve problems using computers, things like technology, spreadsheet, programming, etc. And as I started to become more of a speaker, a trainer, consultant, etc., I realized I was still solving workplace problems, things like employee engagement, stress management, leadership, communication, etc. But I was using humor instead. And so I decided to combine the two and say, okay, well, I'm a humor engineer. I use humor to solve workplace challenges.
Well, real quickly, follow-up question for that. Do you find that companies are actually looking for more humor in the workplace, especially since we've been going through a pandemic now?
Yes and no. Very few people are searching for humor in the workplace. You get about 1,000 global monthly searches on Google, but what they are searching for are things that humor can solve. And that's a key part of using humor, is not talking about, hey, humor for the sake of humor, but rather, are you having issues with stress management? Are you finding it more difficult to communicate and effectively connect with people in a virtual way? Etc. Are you missing the levity from the casual interactions of the office? And that's where we can say, oh, absolutely, humor can help us to do that thing. Also, quick shout out to the people in the chat. They have found, yes, this has changed, and we've got a new Calvin and Hobbes painting that my brother made for me because I'm a huge Calvin and Hobbes fan.
And someone did say the mic's missing as well. Maybe we can't see over your shoulder, but so there you go. Yeah. Stefan, my friend, your bio tells us you didn't just leave a job, you left a lucrative corporate job as a rising star, fast track whiz kid to be a full-time comedian. Why in the world would you do that? And how has it worked out for you?
Oh my God. I'll be completely honest. I miss the recurring paycheck, because even if you didn't do anything at the bank, you'd still get paid every 2 weeks, and that was glorious. But the reason why I did it is because I started doing comedy on the side, and I started seeing what it had done for me. It was therapeutic. I was having lots of fun. My brother, Kurt, in Costa Rica, I'm from Costa Rica. He was also part of Procter and Gamble, and he quit his full-time job in 2008 as well to be a musician. So I kind of had that. He did it first. So while it was a shock for my family, it wasn't as big as the first time with my big brother. I can't explain it. If you've ever been in a cubicle and you're like, I don't know if I can be here for another 10 years. It was, and nothing wrong. I'm so grateful for my 7 years at the bank. I was in wealth management, helping manage millionaires' money. And I'm grateful because I wouldn't be as good as I am today at what I do had I not been there. People think that it's just being on stage and making people laugh, but that's like less than 1% of the time of your everything of your day. You got to be good at marketing, selling, negotiating, finance, accounting, everything. So that was my school. And now into the real world, where if I don't sell and make fun and make people laugh, I don't eat. It's a lot harder, but it's definitely fulfilling. I knew I had to do it, and I just pictured myself two things. When I'm 60, 70, 80, I don't want to look back and be like, what if? And the second thing was that I knew that if I continued in that cubicle, I would always, every single day, be like, what a waste of talent. I don't know what I could have accomplished. So I just had to try. I saved up, and then I was like, if it doesn't work out, I'll come back to the bank in 1 year.
Well, you know what? I so appreciate that comment. I know Tammy wants to kind of riff on that, and I'll let her. But you used the word just now. You said you found humor to be therapeutic. And yes. I want to bounce that to you, Tammy, because you're in hospitals where people are in dire situations. And I'm just wondering, what do you find to be the therapeutic impact of humor, especially as a clown in hospitals?
Well, I was actually just going to piggyback on what he had said, because when I left my full-time job to go into speaking and being an auctioneer, it was because, where I worked was feeding my family, but it wasn't feeding my soul.
Yes.
So exactly what he's talking about. We have to go where it feeds our soul. And whether we're working in a hospital with people or we're just simply in the world, the therapeutic part of humor is so very, very important, because you don't have to be in a hospital bed to be in dire straits, because, especially right now in the middle of the pandemic, when we have a lot of people who are isolated or depressed or stressed, major stress, the humor part of it comes in where we have to say, oh my gosh, what can I control? Because everything else is spinning out of control. So it's really important what he's talking about, that we take that and just like look at each moment and go, oh, this is really kind of overwhelming, but all right, what really is happening here? Come on, let's face it, and that's really when we can kind of break that down. And then that helps relax us and control a little bit more of what we can control. And that's ourselves, not our environment as much, but ourselves.
That's really cool. If we can control ourselves, so the humor has can play a bigger role in everybody's life if we give it a chance.
Mhm.
But your life just makes me go, what in the world? Because not only are you a humorist and a clown, I mean, physically a clown, and I met someone once who told me they flunked clown school. Didn't know that was possible. But you're also an auctioneer.
Mm.
Is there anything funny about being an auctioneer? Yeah, give a couple of lines, give a little riff here so we can hear what it sounds like.
Oh, I love being an auctioneer. Absolutely. I do all types of auctions, but I specialize in fundraising and real estate. So, what I love as far as the fundraising part of it is all humor. It is all engagement. It is all laughter. Because, if you're asking somebody, in some cases, you're asking for $100. In some cases, you're asking for $50,000, right? But I love being engaged with the audience and making them laugh. So I always say that being an auctioneer is really just being a speaker with a little bit faster pace to it. So if I'm out there going $5, I'll be down 10, $10, I'll be down 15, $15, I'll be down 20, $20, I'll be down 25, so it's just really a lot of fun and the rhythm gets you going. So I just love doing that with people. Some fun activities we oftentimes find is in an auction, I might have a husband in front of me. Well, normally it's the other way around. Normally it's the wife is in front of me at the table. The husband's back at the bar getting the drinks and they're bidding against each other for something and they don't realize they're bidding against each other. I see it, and I just let them bid, oh, hey. And then at some point in time, I'll, play around with them a little bit and say, oh, did you realize you're bidding against your husband? So it is fun. And it's really, how can you find that funny? You said it earlier. How can you find the funny? That's what it's about, Mark.
That's awesome. Finding the funny. And we mentioned work and job and auctioneering. And Drew, I know you say you're the humor engineer. You've done some consulting work with some amazing organizations. And people will think, pretty serious. You've got the Red Cross, they're saving lives, and the UN trying to solve world problems, and the FBI. Ooh, get my little earpiece in here. But how can serious groups learn from improv, from humor, having fun while handling very serious issues?
Well, it's a great question, Mark. I appreciate it. Very quickly, before I answer that one, I just want to touch upon what both Stefan and Tammy talked about of this idea of not only just feeding your family, but feeding your soul. I love that, Tammy. I think it's helpful for some people to recognize that you don't have to do what you love, but rather love what you do. And that, I think, is an important distinction, because some people are going to leave the jobs like Stefan did, like I happen to do, et cetera. But some people might not be in the situation where they can kind of like, oh, I'm just going to go and do comedy. But rather, by using humor intentionally in the workplace, you can find ways to enjoy whatever it is that you're doing. And that's going to lead to more success. When we have enjoyment in our work, what we say, what gets fun gets done. And that applies in some of these serious types of roles as well. What's interesting is, particularly like, say, our work with the Red Cross, is they recognize that just because something is serious or important, it doesn't mean that it's inherently interesting. Right? So just because you have a message that you really think the audience needs to hear doesn't mean that they're going to stay engaged. And this is what they're talking about with the Red Cross, is if they're talking about disaster preparedness, messages that could save your life given a flood or a tornado or a drought or whatever they're training on, boredom has very serious consequences. And so, can we use humor as a way to adapt? And the absolute answer is yes. Using humor in our communication, or using humor in the way that we present or train or connect with people, doesn't mean that we don't take what we do seriously. It just means that we know how important it is to resonate with that audience, something which humor can do very, very well.
Now, I'm so glad you mentioned that, resonating with audiences. Now, we're dealing with Toastmasters, and much of our focus is on the presentation and giving the speech. And very often we don't think of the physical side of comedy and humor. For example, Drew, you asked us to look at what was different behind you. And I think, what a cool prop. There's a camera back there. There's a different thing back. Do you ever use props in your talks, Drew?
I don't use a tremendous amount of props, but I do think that activities are a great thing to do. Now, certainly every now and then, if you joined yesterday, I actually use the mute button in Zoom kind of as a prop, almost in a sense, for humor. But I think, exactly to your point, Mark, is that you don't have to think of humor as just setup and punchline or just making people laugh, but rather things like an activity. So for example, one of the things that I love to do, and everyone can do this kind of now as a physical activity as an example, is you can go ahead and point forward on your left hand. So I'll mirror it for you. And then give a thumbs up on your right hand. I'd love for the panelists to try this as well. You guys can jump in, right? You just finger forward, thumb up. And now just switch the two.
Right? Can be difficult.
And you can switch back and forth and back and forth. And the panelists are doing pretty well, but like every now and then people will have like a finger gun, or they'll have like a finger up or down or whatever. Like, yeah, you're trying to text or whatever. This is a simple exercise. This is something that if you're doing this as a training in a Toastmaster, or like an event where you have to speak and you want to send a message, right? This is something fun, interesting, that's a little bit different. So it's going to make people smile or laugh. And you can connect this to the conscious competence learning model, or to trying something new, or the idea of getting over a failure, right? It doesn't have to be just this strict stand-up comedy setup punchline, but there's other forms of humor as well.
Stefan, what do you use for physical humor, props, anything like that in your programs?
So that's such an incredible question and topic, because I always try to have lots of tools in my show. And at the end of the day, it's not a presentation. I like to see it as an experience. What do I want people to feel? Like Maya Angelou said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And at the beginning of my comedy career, I was very book oriented. I read all the books, I studied all the books, I took notes. So I was going in with only setup and punch. And 20% of the time I would kill it, and 80% of the time I'd get nothing. And I'm like, why? It's the same set, just with a different audience. Why are they not laughing? And then I realized like every audience is totally different. First of all, I always arrive early to see them and study them, talk to them, and see what they're like. But then what I also do is, okay, I got my set really well prepared. I got physical, I got accents, I got tonality, and I'm crowd working. Sometimes the material may not kill, but it could be like one thing that you're not expecting. Like this one show I did in Montreal, there was a guy who looked exactly like Vin Diesel. And I was just like, what do you think about this, Vin Diesel? And everyone laughed. Like it just exploded. It was just like that key that you needed to touch, so that, and then the show, same material, the show just, smooth sailing after that. Mm-hmm. And probably they won't remember my show, but they remember the Vin Diesel guy, like the Vin Diesel comedian who made fun of the Vin Diesel guy. So I'm very physical when I talk about Latino stuff or dancing, or parts where it requires for you to be physical. There's parts where it requires for you to do deadpan, pauses, faces without talking. But if you have a really cool combination of things, you never know what that audience may need. And just that little thing that you need for it to go on that wave, you never really know. As soon as you touch that key, you'll just ride the wave, and it'll be smooth sailing after that.
No, thanks, Stefan. That one little thing. Now, Tammy, that one little thing as a clown is really a big thing, because people are seeing you, the costume, the look in itself adds to the image they have of you and the expectation. How significant is the physical aspect of humor and comedy? And how can you link that to what we can do as Toastmasters and speakers who tend to focus so much on the words and not so much on the physical?
Well, I think it really comes down to being relatable to your audience. You know, we're all in this together. I say that many, many times. And those of us who have the honor of being able to travel into different cultures, we find that we are all in this together. So it doesn't matter if you're in Malaysia, Singapore, Canada, it doesn't really matter where you are. People love to be able to laugh. And I have a real quick story. In Bulgaria, we were teaching at the International House of Humor. And in that particular case, we had the honor of going into some children's hospitals. And where we were, they did not speak English, and we did not speak their language. So there are a couple of us clowns who were trying to figure out, how are we going to connect with this audience? And I will say that it was a blessing from God. That's just my personal opinion, because I put a kazoo in my mouth and I said to the clown beside me, do you know how to do balloon animals? She wasn't quite as experienced. And she said, I think I can follow you. So I put a kazoo in and she put a kazoo in. And as I twisted the balloon, we went beep, 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 beep. And she went beep, 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 beep. And it was within seconds. I still get chills. It was within seconds. The whole room, these children, nurses, doctors, we didn't know the language, but we all laughed together. And it was one of the most heartwarming experiences I've ever had. So I think it's finding that relatable part. And that's what it's not really even the physical as much as how can I relate to this audience? How can I tell you what's happening and make that relate to you? So as Toastmasters, many people here are Toastmasters, not everyone, but we're always looking for ways to add that humor. How are we going to relate what's happening in our lives? Because let's face it, guys, life is funny, right? Going to relate what's happening in our lives to relate to our audience and build that bridge. And that's exactly what Stefan was just talking about. And Drew, we're all looking at it from different angles, but we're looking at the same thing.
So where's the kazoo? Come on, Tammy, where's the kazoo? Where's
Oh my, I don't even have one handy, Mark.
We want to see you because the video would be so powerful to see you, see you use a technique or an improv. And Stefan, putting you on the spot real quickly. Do you have a particular improv technique that you do all the time that works for you, or something that you show the audience physically?
I'm a fan of the lookalikes, and I'll crowd work at the beginning of my shows, and I always say, "Oh my God, I didn't know so many celebrities would show up to the show." Here we got, but I already wrote them down before because I'm writing before my show observations about my audience, and then people think that, oh my God, this guy is so like spontaneous, but no, we've done this before. It sounds cool and looks spontaneous, but through repetition, and obviously I don't know before the show who's gonna show up, but I'm writing them down on my little paper, and when I go, I'll crowd work for the first 5 minutes, and I'll do that. And then I'll get the countries going, get the cities going, milk a little bit of the stereotypes, feel my audience. And if they like the stereotypes, they like the lookalikes, then I know it's a green light for me, and then I can go all in. Or if not, then I just know that it's okay. I'll just do my normal material, and I won't really rely on that as much, because if they're not really having it, you don't want to continue spending time on that, because you're gonna waste your credibility, and people may not like you. So I'm starting slow, conversationally, crowd working. If they like it, I go hard. If not, I continue with the game plan.
Now, Stefan, you mentioned something that I want to throw to Drew. You said it looks spontaneous, but I've taken my notes.
Yeah.
I had a mentor who used the phrase, Drew, rehearsed spontaneity.
Yes.
It looks spontaneous, but it's rehearsed. Do you use any kind of technique, Drew, that might mirror rehearsed spontaneity, and how do you use them?
Certainly. I first shout out to Stefan. I think the celebrity lookalike is a great example of that. For those
that's Topher Grace.
For me. Yeah, Topher Grace, or I get skinny Hugh Jackman sometimes. My favorite though is after an event once, a woman came up to me afterwards and she's like, "I think you look like Justin Timberlake, but from here to here." just the eyeballs of JT. But to your point about planned spontaneity, part of it is, I think this is the value of being extemporaneous, right? As a comedian, if you've written a lot of material, I wasn't planning on doing this today, but that is material that I've said before in the past. Oh, there's a point that I can bring it in, and now it feels like it's completely potentially made up on the spot, but it's actually something that has some of that practice behind it. So I think that's one way to do it. I think another is understanding framework. So this is big within the world of improvisation. And so I use a lot of applied improv in my training, and recognizing, just as Stefan does it, you can create a structure where not like, hey, I'm going to plan for this part to be somewhat spontaneous. Having done it a number of times, I'm going to have that practice and repetition of knowing what it's like, but it's very structured. And that structure just makes the process easier. It doesn't make it less creative. And then to your question, Mark, on improv in general, as I mentioned, I think applied improv is a fantastic way to do some training. And if we have a moment, I can do a quick exercise maybe at some point today, but it is a way for people to not only learn what kind of content you're talking about, but to experience it themselves.
Now I'm curious, Tammy, have you done improv yourself, Tammy?
Yes.
You got improv. Stefan's done improv, and Drew has done improv. You know what sounds like fun? I'd love for you to do a little improv right now. Folks, this is not rehearsed. I haven't chosen my topic yet. I'm going to wing it. But if I give you a scenario, Can you kind of riff on that? How do you, Drew, how do you create an improv skit? Help me out here.
Well, there's a couple of things that come to mind. We could either do a very specific game. So I'm a big fan of something like first letter, last letter, which has a certain structure to it, which you can explain to people as they play it. Or you can kind of just give a suggestion, and then improvisers, one of the fundamental mindset of improvisation is this idea of yes and. And so rather than you tell us something and we're going to like argue back and forth at what it is, it's whatever you say, we're going to decide to build off of what each other talks about so that we create a more compelling experience as opposed to arguing about something that isn't real.
Well, I see Stefan kind of nodding. So I want to let you vote. Stefan and Tammy, which of those two do you want to do? First letter, last letter, or yes and?
Yes and. I mean, yes and is the rule number one anyways, but yeah, yes and give us a place, a situation, and we'll
Drew?
just run with it.
Take it away, Drew. Go for it.
All right, excellent. So all I need is in the chat, can I get a suggestion of a location that you absolutely love, a
Beach.
place? Oh,
Not
beach
nude
is the
beach.
first thing
We'll
that
go
I saw
with
when
beach, not nude beach.
We're going to go with the first answer of that. The answer is, sorry, suggestion of a location is beach. And that's kind of all we need to get started with a little bit of a scene. So I'll step back for a moment and allow Tammy and Stefan to start.
Stefan, go ahead.
Ay, 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 Tammy, I love this beach. It seems like I want to do yoga, but also going to the water. What did you want to do?
Oh my gosh, it's so incredible to be out here. And I was really excited because you're not going to believe, I saw all these purple people coming down the beach and they were carrying on their shoulders going, woo, 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 woo. And I realized it was none other than Mark Brown on their shoulders.
Oh my God, the purple people and Mark Brown, the voice of God, the B.O.D. Oh my God, was he wearing his bow tie?
Oh, he was wearing the bow tie. You would not have believed what he was doing. But then when they went further down the beach, I turned around and realized it wasn't just Mark Brown. It was also Drew was with him. I thought, what are these two doing out here on the beach? It was so cool.
Oh
Guys, Stefan and Tammy, oh my God, I'm so excited. Mark has promised he's going to teach me how to improvise rap on the beach. We said, let's come down to the beach, let's get into the sand. And he's like, I'm going to drop some rhymes for you. Can you believe it? Can we give him a little bit of excitement and maybe cheer him on? Because I think he's going to totally give us improvised rhymes.
Now, I've never had a kazoo before in a rap contest. But you know what? As a speaker, I've been told I'm the best. I could keep going, but I'm going to give you a rest because now I'm going to give Stefan a chance. Will you pass the test?
Oh my, wake up, Mr. West, Mr. Fresh, Mr. By himself. He's so impressed. I mean, damn, did you even see the test? It's Mr. West.
Now I'm going to confess to the whole world, to 2,000 people watching live, I have never, and I repeat, never, ever done that in my life. But you know what? But it was fun. And Tammy got the kazoo going, had some fun with that as well. And it just kind of taught me very quickly that we can improvise, have fun, find a way to bring some rhythm to it. I mean, Stefan, you brought your accent to bear. I didn't bring mine because you wouldn't understand it. But there's so many ways we can do this. And it could be a fun exercise. And as Toastmasters, we have table topics. And we played various games where one person begins the story, somebody else continues to the end. But this was really fun to inject the music, the visual, the atmosphere. That was really, really cool. People, now, I know that Drew is kind of watching the chat really fast because Drew can read a lot faster than I can. What are you seeing there, Drew?
Well, there's a lot of excitement in the chat, happiness, fun, congratulations. In fact, can we get some exclamation points in the chat from Mark? Because what I did there was I very intentionally set him up. And sometimes you can do that, but I knew Mark had the skill set and the capability to do it. And a couple of things just to maybe, I don't think take the fun out of it, but from an applied improv standpoint, when we do that with our audiences or our clients, one of the most valuable parts of the experience is the debrief. Is to talk a little bit about that to help the audience connect what was fun to what they're trying to learn. Because I will admit, sometimes early on in my career, I would do improv exercises like this and people would be like, that was fun, but I don't see how that's going to help me be a better nurse or a better project manager or a better manager. And so the debrief helps you connect those pieces, and we can come back and talk about either the, treating each other like geniuses and poets and yes-anding each other's ideas, the point of having fun, of, even if you're not sure of what's going to happen, still delivering something with confidence. That debrief part becomes really valuable in terms of leaving a lasting impression. And now, rather than us just talking about improv, we've also demonstrated it, something that everyone can be a part of.
Now, and I want to thank you all for that, because that felt, you know what? I feel an actual rush to my system, because truly, I have never, ever tried to rap or to rap spontaneously for 2,000 people. Never before. Tammy, what's your comment?
Well, my comment was, I always tell people when I'm talking about Toastmasters, I say, you never know what you're being prepared for. And while we're talking about that, about things that might be serious in life, and Toastmasters helps prepare us to be able to go out and present and do that. But this is exactly what Drew's talking about too, because, we're being prepared that we have a little bit of a funny bone, that sense of humor that we can, whatever given the situation, that we can play. And that was really perfect. You guys did a great job letting me play along.
I love that. I got a question for each of you, though, as speakers, and I think it might help those who are watching who are more used to speaking. Some of us are so keyed up, we want to do well, and we're in a live situation and something happens, something goes wrong, somebody's phone rings, a cat or a dog makes a sound, something happens, the siren starts going, and we get thrown off. From each of you, I'll go Drew, then Stefan, then Tammy. What spontaneous responses can you give when something happens, a distraction, a heckle, or an unexpected thing that could throw you off? Again, Drew, Stefan, and then Tammy. How do you respond in the moment when something goes wrong? Humorously.
And I think it's a great point. This is what we in comedy call calling the moment, or calling the room. And it's a very important thing to do, because if you're speaking and someone drops a glass and it shatters everywhere, the audience is going to be like, did that person see that happen? And until you address it, they're going to be distracted. Yeah. But as soon as you address it, and oftentimes if you can use humor to do it, then it eases the situation. People are like, oh, great, now we can move on from it. I think within that, back to that idea of planned spontaneity, is you can plan for certain things that are going to happen. Eventually the mic is going to drop, or the lights are going to go out, or in Zoom, someone's going to be muted for a little bit, right? You can plan for certain things to happen and get have backups ready for them. One of the big questions that people ask is, what do you do if you tell a joke and it doesn't land or it doesn't work? And so that's an example of calling the moment. Is some comedians, one of my favorite comedians, Eddie Izzard, she's amazing. She'll take out of an imaginary notebook and then write a note to herself and be like, okay, never tell that joke again. Or that was funnier than they gave credit for, or whatever it is. And that allows that, okay, hey, we've all called the moment of what's just happened. We can laugh about it. And now we're moving on to the next thing.
Awesome. Stefan?
I totally agree with Drew. You have to use what's available. If it didn't land, then make a joke about it. But I've done it, and then I've seen other comedians do it like 13 times in a row, and then it's not funny anymore, because it's just, you're not funny. The set is not funny. So I think for like one or two or three times it'll work, and you have to see if the crowd is still loving it on the fourth time. The other thing is, like Drew said, if they're paying more attention to the spilled beer or the people's whispering or whatever, you have to address it. Otherwise, you already lost. They're not even paying attention to you anymore. So you have to address it. And then the other thing that I've done is, the mic went off, or the batteries of the wireless mic went off, and it had happened to me initially in my career, and I didn't know what to do. So now, like Drew said, I was prepared, and I started doing the show without the mic for 3 minutes until I got a new mic. And they were loving it because I was screaming, I was making fun of myself, I was doing callbacks to the show, and clearly they could see me suffering because I had to yell, but I was making fun of my yelling. And then if it goes too much and it's too uncomfortable, or nobody can listen to you, or the lights are not working, or it's unhandled, you can't handle it. Another little trick that I learned is, nobody will ever complain about a 5-minute break. If you can't control it, if it's just gets out of control, or there's a fight or whatever, we're just going to take a 5-minute break and we'll be right back. Just go have some water, go to the bathroom. We'll be right back. And everybody loves that. Nobody's going to complain. Everyone's going to come back and we're going to continue the show. So point out the elephant in the room or call the room like Drew said. And if it gets out of control, 5-minute break, never hurt anyone.
Thanks so much, Tammy.
Oh, I totally agree with what my colleagues are saying. You know, you have to address it, because if you don't, you're distracted. So not only you're distracted, the audience is distracted. You have to embrace it and just go with it. I was kind of curious with Stefan though. You know, how often do fights break out at your comedy show? Curious on where you're really performing here.
I've performed in many rough things. I've only been like 3 in my career.
Yeah. Well, I love to play with the audience too. But that goes back to what we said very, very early at the beginning. You know, oftentimes when you're meeting the people as they're coming in and then something happens, you can go to that person, you can go to the people that you were talking with and have them play along and say, did you see that? Oh my gosh, I cannot believe that woman looked, you know, whatever the case is. So it really has to do with seeing the entire audience, not just one moment in time, but seeing the entire audience and how you address something that can be very disrupting to you and for the audience.
Okay, now on that same point, Drew, our humor engineer, do you create a list of go-tos in certain scenarios? And if so, can you share a few of them? Certain unexpected scenarios, is there a go-to list of responses?
Yeah, certainly. So I think one, if my get muted for whatever reason in a virtual scenario, then after I come back off of mute, I'll say, listen, that last tip was so important that the government shut it down. They didn't even want you to hear it. I'm going to repeat it one more time so you actually hear what's going to be said. So I think that's a great one. For if I say a joke and the audience doesn't laugh, a lot of times I will just move past it, because what's interesting is if you have positive, inclusive humor, if it's a joke that no one laughs at, it just goes from a joke to a now positive, inclusive statement, right? It's not a thing that I have to be like awkwardly like, hey, did you laugh? Did you get that? Or other things. Or I'll sometimes poke fun of myself of like, clearly, I think it's funnier than you all. I think it's also valuable. One of the things, and Stefan may do this as well, is comedians will sometimes have test jokes. And he talked about it a little bit earlier. Is like, for example, Mark, you and I have talked about, I love puns. So I'll say a pun at the beginning of my presentation, something like, a man once asked if I wanted a free fish. So I asked, what's the catch? Pun, right? Exactly. And so if the audience laughs, then it's like, okay, great, I can do more puns a little bit later. If they groan, great, I'm going to do more puns later, but I'm also going to have that fun back and forth about it. If there's no response whatsoever, then it's like, okay, I know that I can adjust my humor as I go forward and I won't do puns, but maybe I'll do more storytelling. So I'll adapt my entire presentation or set based on the reactions people are giving.
Oh, thank you. And Stefan, is there 1 or 2 definite go-tos if a phone rings or a siren sounds and you can't hear you? Do you have a go-to prepared responses for that in the middle of your presentation?
Well, yeah, I don't have it like prepared, but I'll definitely, if it's too loud and she picks up or he picks up, I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna be like, no, pick up. We want to talk to your mom, and then I'll get them to come up and we'll get the call together. And then I need to do it because people are paying more attention to the phone call than me. So it's very important to, but it all comes back to like Drew and Tammy said, that you need to understand your audience. Because if this is the CEO of the company that hired me, I'm not gonna risk the presentation and the mood because of this little joke. I mean, it could work, but there's a lot of risk. So, but if I know, because I've been seeing him or I've been talking or I've been seeing her and I know they're playful, then I'll do it. And it's very important that you don't take it personally, the reactions of the people to your punchlines and to your jokes, because that could throw you off. Like Drew was saying yesterday, you have to assume that you're crushing it. But also you have to really be aware of what risks can you take. So if someone's like this, I'm not going to take a risk of trying to get this guy to participate in my show and get the crowd work, because he doesn't look like he wants to crowd work and want to be part of my show. But the people who are nodding and they're leaning in, I know they'll contribute to my show. So I got to pick my battles, and I got to know who to talk to and who to crowd work with and who I can kind of pick on in some ways. So it comes with experience, but you can't really analyze the audience and be present if you don't know your material well. Because if you don't know it well, you're going to be worried about, and they can tell if you don't know, because your eyes go, and no, so as I was telling you, yeah, and they can tell you're improvising. So you have to really know your material well. Like I practiced 20 times in the previous 2 days before my shows so that I am super confident about it and I can be present. Otherwise, I'm going to be suffering the whole night.
Well, our time has fast fleeted. I've got one last short answer question for each of you. Tammy first, then Stefan, and then Drew. What is your one quick tip for everybody to finding funny? How do we just find funny around us? One quick tip, Tammy, then Stefan, then Drew, and then Linda will take over.
It takes a little bit of practice. Look at everything and say, what is funny about that? And give yourself a list and give yourself the permission to be funny and go with it.
Thanks. Stefan?
Carry a humor notebook. Like Drew said yesterday, carry a humor notebook, because the more you advance in your career, you'll realize that it's not the words, but it's more your delivery and your view of the world. But at the beginning, I was saying the same things that I'm saying now, but nobody was laughing. It's just that now I know how to say it because I know myself better. But I can't say anything if I don't have my humor notebook of the things that I find funny in my worldview.
Thank you. Drew, he stole your point, but find something else.
No, it's a great point. All of the points are great. And the last thing is, I would say, make it a habit. Try to force yourself. And this is where, when I first started, when Twitter came out, it was a great thing. It was like, I want to post a pun every single day. And it will then force you to spend, whether it's 2 minutes or 20 minutes, like, I got to come up with something. What can I do? But hold yourself accountable. Create a little writers group within your Toastmasters organization or a group of friends or whatever, and say, okay, let's each try to share something each day that is a simple observation or a joke. And that will help get you into the habit of creating.
Drew, Stefan, Tammy, thank you all so much. Linda, I return
you.
control to you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I was muted, but I was laughing out loud, especially the rap. You have definitely raised the level of laughter. I can't imagine if I did my poll again that anyone would say that they haven't laughed today. We have gotten so many questions come in from our audience. So I want to jump right in and get into some of those. You've answered some of them along the way, but one of the themes, I should say, that has come up is related to virtual presentations and virtual speeches and just virtual meetings. So I'm going to start with Drew. Everyone, of course, can jump in to answer part of the questions, but we want to get quite a few questions in if we can in the time we have left. So starting with Drew, a couple of questions specifically from Harry and AJ, but because so many of us are virtual and we're not all using video and audio, how do we hold for laughs? How do we deal with that lack of the audience feedback regarding timing for delivery and pausing for those reactions?
It's a great question. And, one, as kind of Stefan alluded to, and we chatted briefly about this yesterday, is one, assume that you're crushing it, have that confidence and just kind of deliver, because that's going to come across. And actually, it's something that Mark said yesterday, somewhat as a joke, I think, but it actually can work, is if you're newer to some material, sometimes having another human being in the room with you helps, whether that is a loved one who is also at home, or a friend that you are double bubbling with, or whatever it is. But having another human in the room that is kind of nodding and smiling can certainly help. And I think, recognize that you do a disservice to your message and to your audience if you are second guessing your material in the moment. That goes back to Stefan's point of practice. It's like, do the hard work up front so that when you're there, you can be in the moment and adapt to it, and leave a little slightly longer pause, because you don't want to step on your laughter. That's probably one of the common early mistakes that people new into humor do, is they say something that's actually funny, but it might take a moment for the audience to get. And so as the audience is just getting to laugh, the speaker starts speaking again. And so then the audience doesn't laugh because they're like, well, now I want to hear what that person says. So make sure that you're not stepping on your laughter and give a little bit more time. Because again, even if people aren't laughing in that moment, if you hold that moment confidently, it doesn't feel like a awkward what's going on. It just feels like the person has confidence to take up space.
And real quick, I suggest this also. Get a bunch of friends together, have a little test Zoom meeting. Test your material out and see how people
Yeah.
respond to you. Get a few Zoom buddies, from your club, 8, 9, 10 of you. Hey, I got 3 minutes. Let's go for it. And see their response. You'll gain in confidence, and it'll give you an idea of how the real audience will respond as well.
Absolutely.
All right, Tammy, being our, medical expert on the panel, we're going to start with you, but can you speak at all to the science behind the benefits of laughter?
There's really some interesting research out there. I mean, it basically started with Norman Cousins in Anatomy of an Illness. I mean, he still to this day is considered to be the father of that type of research. But what they're really finding is that laughter, and it doesn't have to even be belly laughing, but just laughing and enjoying. It will decrease your blood pressure. It helps build the immune system. So there's a lot of really interesting pieces out there. In the article on Toastmasters Magazine has out, we cite some of those sources on how to do that. I'm not the medical expert. I certainly would not like to be able to speak on going through breast cancer with clown noses, kazoos, and rubber chickens, but it's something that happened. I didn't have a choice. So I would certainly say go out there and research that. Doesn't have to be strong belly laughing, but there's a lot of really good, especially related to the heart, a lot of really good research out there now about the humor and that healing process.
Thank you, Tammy. Stefan, Efren has asked, what can you recommend to someone like him who doesn't think he has a funny bone in his body? And Amy also asked something similar, what helped you transition using Toastmasters and other resources as a tool to help you make a change and find your funny?
Well, as I've said on the magazine where I did an article with many of you, I didn't know that I was funny until I joined Toastmasters in a way, because all my speeches, even if they were serious, people were laughing, and I was like, I'm trying to. So I knew that I had something. Then I started doing sketch comedy, little comedy videos on Vine, and Vine is the TikTok for old people.
I like that.
In case some of you youngsters don't know what it is. So then I started seeing it, but I was like, I know I'll get there and be really funny, but I don't have the time. I want to get better now, because it's so hard. It's horrible to fail on stage. Like so I'm like, I need to read books, and I need to just copy the blueprint of what the goats, the best, have done. So my recommendation is obviously get on stage, the humor path of Toastmasters. But the one book that I read by Judy Carter, who is one of the best comedy authors, she's also on the official Toastmasters podcast, like 20 episodes ago. It's called Stand Up Comedy, and by Judy Carter. And she also has the Comedy Bible, and there's lots of exercises that you can do, not jokes that people already know, from your own experience, and then you can just try them out with friends, and they don't have to know.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Drew, we're going to shift gears a little bit. Julius asked, what do you believe is the greatest misconception about using humor in training and development workshops, virtual webinars, etc.?
The greatest misconception, I think there are a number of them, but I think probably the biggest one, and we spoke a little bit about it, is that humor is not appropriate for serious or somber topics. And I think the reality is, right, if the message that you have is important, then you would want to do every strategy that you have to get an audience to be engaged in that topic, of which we know humor to be an incredibly powerful one. Now, obviously, there's a component to how do you do that effectively. And one of the things that I think is particularly helpful is recognizing that you can have humorous moments, and then you can have those somber moments or those serious moments, and the delta change between the two actually leaves much more of an impact on an audience than if you're just serious the entire time, and in reality, if you're just funny the entire time. But you can say, okay, if you know you're getting ready to go into something that tends to bring the room down, but it's important for them here, you can use a little bit of humor before you head into it. Then you can have that kind of discussion, and then you can use a little bit of humor as you come out of it as well. And so I think that's probably the biggest misconception, is that, no, I talk about death, or I talk about cancer, I talk about, child mutilation, or other, like, these things that are really important that we need to have conversations about. It's not about using humor throughout the entire thing all the time, but in the moments to manage the audience.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Mark, I'm going to put a question to you. And again, any of the panelists are welcome to add their perspectives. Michelle mentioned that many of us have a concern about diversity, equity, inclusion, etc. And thinking about using humor, how do we bridge that respect and support the acceptance and open-mindedness, etc.? Any tips or perspectives on that?
Well, we have to be aware that the world is being much more sensitive now to DEI, as they call diversity, engagement, and inclusion. So if it might cross the line, maybe you don't want to do it. It's also one reason I think it's good to have a mastermind group, people you can bounce things off who are definitely aware of what's happening. I would say err on the side of caution. I was in the Middle East several years ago, and I was told very early on 3 topics to avoid: politics, sex, and religion. And in my keynote, one of my opening lines was, well, I was told not to discuss politics, sex, and religion, so I'll therefore address all 3 at one time. And they busted out laughing. But it was in the context of the presentation. It was called Together Towards Tomorrow was their theme. I said, we don't discuss these things because, you know what? We don't make fun of these things because it's divisive. We want to be together. So we want to avoid anything that's going to be causing any kind of division. So I said, be ultra sensitive, err on the side of caution, and as Drew would say, try to be as universal and as international as possible so anybody can get a good laugh without anybody else feeling that there was any level of discomfort, or was that not really funny, was it making fun of me? Now, truth be told, there are several things to be aware of these days, and I'm learning more and more as time goes by. But if your heart is in the right place and you want to serve well, it can make a difference. And I know that Stefan wants to go all over the response to this. I'll let him piggyback on that.
Thank you, Mark. So important what Mark said, and your audience and the event that you're attending and the context in which you're mentioning these things. Obviously, in the comedy world that I live in, or the corporate workshops and keynotes that I give, because I'm Latino, and in North America it's a minority, or because Latinos have been a victim in specific countries or scenarios, and because it's my truth, I get a buy. I can talk about it. And I can also make fun of it because I am in a way of the victim. So by me being the victim as a Latino in some ways, or the group that has been marginalized in other ways, I can punch up towards the people who have abused their power, and nobody's gonna really get offended, because if you get offended, you're really defending the power abusers. So I don't say that I've made a living out of it, but my whole comedy is about immigration and the hardships and culture shock of moving to try and get a better place, the Canadian dream, the American dream. So very important to know the context and the audience, but if it's your truth, I don't think people can get offended.
Really? Oh, go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, especially in the corporate environment, the stakes are much higher for the humor that you use. The bar is much lower for what's funny, but the stakes are higher. And my mom works in HR, which is always often seen as a fun place. But my mom likes to say, you can't spell humor without HR, because otherwise it'd just be UMO. But so you can see where I get my sense of humor from. But I love and to Mark's point, we were joking before, I do have a flow chart of what's appropriate, not appropriate. But I think that's the most helpful is if you're a little bit older, then we call this a newspaper rule. If you're a little bit younger, we call this the woke Twitter rule. And the rule is basically, would you be comfortable with whatever joke or saying that you said showing up on the front page of your hometown newspaper or getting blasted all over Twitter? And if you're like, I don't know if I'd want everyone in the world to see I made this joke to this group of people, then it's probably not appropriate for the workplace.
Really great points. And we don't have time to ask more questions. So before we wrap up, I do want all of you members of our terrific panel to let the audience know how can they connect with you or find out more about you or find out more about these resources you've been talking about. So let's go in this order. We will go Tammy, Stefan, Drew, then Mark. Maybe 10 seconds. Where can they find you and find out more?
All right, the easiest place to find me is at Tammy Speaks, TammySpeaks.com. It has information about the speaking and the auctions as well. So glad to be here today.
You can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram, and you can see my name here on the Zoom, Stefan Dyer, and stefandyer.com.
Let's see. So I just shared in the chat a link to a free humor personality assessment that we're doing recently. So you can either click that or go to humorthatworks.com. If you want to connect with me personally or just want puns, I'm on at Drew Tarvin on all social media. That includes Twitter, LinkedIn, and I still have a MySpace page. I don't know why. MySpace still exists. But if you're on MySpace and that's where you want to connect, it's also at Drew Tarvin.
That's for your
Like
rapping band.
Antiques Roadshow, right? Antiques Roadshow.
You can get me, of course, at Mark Leo Brown on Twitter. I am Mark Brown CSP on LinkedIn. My website is markbrownspeaks.com. And tune in to the world's only podcast for speakers, the Unforgettable Presentations Podcast at unforgettablepresentationspodcast.com.
Well, thank you all so much, Mark, Stefan, Tammy, and Drew, for spending this great hour of laughter with all of us today. We so appreciate laughing with you, hearing about your stories, your insights, and members of the audience. Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for engaging in the chat. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending the recording of today's workshop to everybody who registered. Please feel free, forward it to any friends, colleagues, Uncle Joe, whoever you think will benefit from everything our Council of Comedy shared with us today. And remember, laughter is the best medicine. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye now.